morning and welcome to Sharper Iron. Spend the next hour with us studying the living and active Word of God, His two-edged sword of law and gospel, recorded for you in Holy Scripture, all about Jesus Christ, crucified, risen, and ascended for you. Thanks for tuning in this morning here on Worldwide KFUO. Christ for you, anytime, anywhere. I am your host, Pastor Timothy Appel. Thank you to our generous underwriters on Sharper Iron, the Lutheran Church Extension Fund, where your investments help support the work of the Lutheran Church Missouri Synod. Visit lcef.org for more information. And Luther Classical College, a college for Lutherans by Lutherans, opening in fall 2025. Learn more at lutherclassical.org. On this Wednesday, November 2nd, we are studying Joshua chapter 18, verses 1 to 28. 5 tribes have received their inheritance of land, and 7 tribes remain. A transition in location to Shiloh provides the opportunity for these 7 allotments, starting with the tribe of Benjamin. To help us sharpen our faith in Christ as we study God's Word today, we have with us regular guest, Pastor Sam Wirgau. Pastor Wirgau serves at Bethlehem Lutheran Church in Ossian, Indiana. Pastor Wirgau, welcome back to Sharper Iron.
Thanks for having me.
So, Pastor Wirgau, let's talk a little context. What should we know as we prepare to look at Joshua 18 today?
Yeah, you kind of mentioned a little bit of it. I mean, we're in Joshua, so Joshua's primarily dealing with the promised land and the people of Israel entering the promised land. We talk about kind of 2 phases in Joshua, that of the conquest of the land and then the taking of possession by each tribe. So we're in that latter part here. And as you mentioned, we've already had kind of the 5 of the tribes received their allotment so far, beginning in chapter 13. And this kind of brings us to kind of a halfway point and a shift in location too, which I think is important to see. So again, kind of the overall emphasis is what we've kind of been seeing already, the emphasis on the promised land as an inheritance that God has handed over to his people and now will be divided. This inheritance will be divided among them. I borrowed heavily from the Concordia commentary on this by Dr. Harstad. And he's got a great quote here kind of to help set the context here, that the Lord's presence and activity in accord with his word will bring success to his faithful people in the second phase, that is the occupation and the possession, according with his word. Will bring success to the faithful people in the second phase as it had in the first. There's a clear distinction in the book of Joshua between the 2 phases. The land has already been given by the Lord and even taken by Israel in this initial conquest. Joshua refers to the land that the Lord, the God of your fathers, has given you, and that's going to be in verse 13 here. And now we have the individual tribes going and taking possession of this land. What we have in 18 is kind of a transition here, both of location, but then also of the allotment to these remaining tribes. And then the latter part of 18 will focus particularly on the land that is allotted to Benjamin.
So with that section, particularly on the allotment to Benjamin, because that's the section we've been reading that kind of text for a while now in the book of Joshua. And it's one of those texts where perhaps even some of the regular guests on Sharper Iron, when they see the text that they've been assigned, because you don't get to choose normally, they think Joshua 18, I don't know much about Joshua 18. And there's a lot of names there that I don't know. They're hard to pronounce. I don't know where these places are. Certainly there's members at our congregation that may find these texts challenging. Pastor Wirgau, if you've got somebody in your church who's reading through the book of Joshua and they come to this chapter and they say, Pastor Wirgau, what do I do with this? Why is this important for me as a Christian? This is something I've been asking all the pastors for this section. What do you tell that parishioner?
Well, I mean, I think because we're dealing with the real here. We're dealing with hard names to pronounce because these were real cities, real places, real land that the people were getting, which is, of course, going to point us forward. But I think that concrete reality that we have here, even in Joshua, shows just the detail that the Lord had in providing for his chosen people, real places, real borders, real land that you can even go to today, though the cities not so much. And that our God is not a God who dealt in the Old Testament in abstract things, but in real solid things for his people. The gifts that he gives are real concrete things. And of course, as I mentioned, these things point us forward. So all the details and difficult names and everything testify to the concreteness of God's promises, which then find their fulfillment in a flesh and blood Messiah that comes to this real world, this real promised land in the flesh, concretely, to give his life as a ransom for many.
I like what you said about the place names, and the fact that they are difficult to pronounce reminds us that they are real. Every place has these street names or town names that the locals know how to pronounce, but when you come in as a visitor and you try to pronounce it, they correct you, and you look at the word and you're like, that shouldn't be pronounced that way.
Yep.
But it is. And all of that is just to remind us of, this is real history that we're talking about. This isn't a fantasy land. This isn't made up, but these are real places with real people, all of whom received the salvation of God and received the real fulfillment of his promises. And so, what a fantastic reminder of why this text is important for us as Christians, even if we have trouble pronouncing the name. So maybe let's lean into that sometimes. That these are actually real places that God fulfilled his promises, even as he continues to fulfill his real promises for us real sinners today. He gives that salvation.
Yeah.
So any more introductory comments before we jump into Joshua 18?
I want to just jump a little bit more on what you said. I mean, this is wonderful for the historicity of our Christian faith, and the archaeological evidence and just the historical evidence that we have for these real places that can be verifiable historically. And you contrast that with some other sacred writings from false teachings and false religions. You don't have that as much because their religion doesn't need to be verifiable. For example, some of the cities that are claimed in like the Book of Mormon absolutely cannot be verifiable archaeologically, and just show that it is mere fiction, where Christian faith rests upon historic fact and that verifiability that it has, which is why, I mean, people who are really into biblical archaeology and things of that nature love these kind of cities and names, and you read some of the commentaries and they go into so much detail that I have trouble wrapping my brain around sometimes when they're finding these places and locating these and seeing such a great significance with it.
Yeah, that's right. So one day, if perhaps I when I meet Joshua in eternity and he corrects my pronunciation that I'm about to attempt, I can rejoice in that, because it means that these are real places that actually existed. And even though I don't know how to pronounce it, he does because he was actually there. What a beautiful thing.
Yes.
So let's jump in to Joshua chapter 18 today. Then the whole congregation of the people of Israel assembled at Shiloh and set up the tent of meeting there. The land lay subdued before them. There remained among the people of Israel 7 tribes whose inheritance had not yet been apportioned. So Joshua said to the people of Israel, "How long will you put off going in to take possession of the land, which the Lord, the God of your fathers, has given you? Provide 3 men from each tribe, and I will send them out that they may set out and go up and down the land. They shall write a description of it with a view to their inheritances, and then come to me. They shall divide it into 7 portions. Judah shall continue in his territory on the south, and the house of Joseph shall continue in their territory on the north. And you shall describe the land in 7 divisions, and bring the description here to me. And I will cast lots for you here before the Lord our God. The Levites have no portion among you, for the priesthood of the Lord is their heritage. And Gad and Reuben and half the tribe of Manasseh have received their inheritance beyond the Jordan eastward, which Moses, the servant of the Lord, gave them." So the men arose and went. And Joshua charged those who went to write the description of the land, saying, "Go up and down in the land, and write a description and return to me. And I will cast lots for you here before the Lord in Shiloh." So the men went and passed up and down in the land, and wrote in a book a description of it by towns in 7 divisions. Then they came to Joshua to the camp at Shiloh, and Joshua cast lots for them in Shiloh before the Lord. And there Joshua apportioned the land to the people of Israel, to each his portion. The lot of the tribe of the people of Benjamin, according to its clans, came up, and the territory allotted to it fell between the people of Judah and the people of Joseph. On the north side, their boundary began at the Jordan. Then the boundary goes up to the shoulder north of Jericho, then up through the hill country westward, and it ends at the wilderness of Beth-aven. From there, the boundary passes along southward in the direction of Luz, to the shoulder of Luz, that is, Bethel. Then the boundary goes down to Ataroth Adar, on the mountain that lies south of Lower Beth Horon. Then the boundary goes in another direction, turning on the western side, southward from the mountain that lies to the south, opposite Beth Horon, and it ends at Kiriath Baal, that is Kiriath Jearim, a city belonging to the people of Judah. This forms the western side. And the southern side begins at the outskirts of Kiriath Jearim, and the boundary goes from there to Ephron, to the spring of the waters of Nephtoah. Then the boundary goes down to the border of the mountain that overlooks the valley of the son of Hinnom, which is at the north end of the valley of Rephaim. And it then goes down the valley of Hinnom, south of the shoulder of the Jebusites, and downward to En Rogel. Then it bends in a northerly direction, going on to En Shemesh, and from there goes to Geliloth, which is opposite the ascent of Adamim. Then it goes down to the stone of Bohan, the son of Reuben, and passing on to the north of the shoulder of Beth Arabah, it goes down to the Arabah. Then the boundary passes on to the north of the shoulder of Beth Hoglah, and the boundary ends at the northern bay of the Salt Sea, at the south end of the Jordan. This is the southern border. The Jordan forms its boundary on the eastern side. This is the inheritance of the people of Benjamin, according to their clans, boundary by boundary all around. Now, the cities of the tribe of the people of Benjamin, according to their clans, were Jericho, Beth Hoglah, Emek Keziz, Beth Arabah, Zemarim, Bethel, Avim, Parah, Ophrah, Kephar Ammoni, Ophni, Geba, 12 cities with their villages, Gibeon, Ramah, Beeroth, Mizpeh, Kephirah, Moza, Rechem, Irpeel, Taralah, Zelah, Haleph, Jebus, that is Jerusalem, Gibeah, and Kiriath Jearim, 14 cities with their villages. And this is the inheritance of the people of Benjamin according to its clans. That's our text. That's Joshua 18, verses 1 to 28. All right, so Pastor Wirgau, as you said, we've got a bit of a transition here in Joshua chapter 18 at the beginning. And one of the big parts of the transition is the location. So the whole congregation goes to Shiloh, and they set up the tent of meeting there. Talk about the setting for this text.
Yeah, so this is a move of location. So previously the allotments were made at Gilgal. That's where Israel had first camped after they crossed the Jordan River into the Promised Land. That's where the site of the memorial of the 12 stones from the Jordan was taken as a memorial to the people and to the future generations. And what's significant too is that Gilgal was also the central place of worship. So we see with this transition, not only a transitioning of a central meeting place of the people of Israel, but the transition to Shiloh is also what they take with them is the tabernacle. That is, not only is this the central place where they're going to meet together, but this is the place where God is going to meet with them. And we see it come up several times in 18, where we have these things taking place before the Lord. We're not, we're not told specifically why there is this change, why there is this movement, perhaps, but it is good. It's where they need to be. Some people have made some comments on Shiloh. For one, Shiloh might come from the word meaning to be at rest, though there's some debate on that. But I like that. The idea that this is the idea of the place where the sanctuary of the Lord would rest, where the people would rest, in that sense. But also even the geographical, physical landscape of Shiloh actually served well the purposes that it had in being this new location where it was actually kind of like a natural amphitheater where these kind of announcements and such could be made. But I think even more significant is in Shiloh, what makes Shiloh so important is that the people of Israel are gathered there and that this is the place where the tabernacle is.
Yeah, so we have the tabernacle here mentioned in 18:1, and you have in your notes that this is actually the first time the tabernacle has been mentioned in Joshua, and I guess I hadn't realized that until you pointed that out, so this is pretty significant.
Yeah, I think so. We assume the tabernacle came with them across, right?
Right.
And that the Levites are bringing it across, but according to Harstad, that this was the first place that we see it mentioned in this way, and that it's talked about. And that is that in verse 1 that the tabernacle it was caused to dwell there in that tent, the tabernacle or the tent of meeting. The ESV has that translated as they set up the tent of meeting. More literally, it's translated as caused to dwell, which I think really does connect the words to Exodus 25:8, where it says, and let them make me, the Lord says, let them make me a sanctuary that I may dwell in their midst. So the idea to dwell in the midst of them, that was the purpose of the tabernacle, which of course, again, finds its fulfillment in the Christ, the Word made flesh, that the word John 1:14, the Word became flesh and dwelt or tabernacled among us, and we have seen his glory. Again, this is where the presence of the Lord is for his people. So as God is giving these people and now dividing and allotting these lands to these people, it's always his to give as a gift, and he is actually present among his people in a very concrete, real way in that tent of meeting. And also in that tabernacle was the place of the Ark of the Covenant.
So this is a pretty significant development that the tent of meeting is set up. We've been thinking about the book of Joshua as fulfillment of God's promises, and as the land is being allotted, certainly that's God fulfilling his promise. But the fact that the tent of meeting now is explicitly mentioned, this is more than just a matter of you get this real estate, but this is going to be the place where God dwells among you. That's pretty significant theologically.
Yeah, and it's going to be a place, that location of Shiloh will be the place of the tabernacle for pretty much an extended period of time through the period of the judges. Harstad said that some 300 years later, it'll be briefly moved to Shechem because there'll be a covenantal renewal there in Joshua 24. But it resides in Shiloh all the way, I believe, till Samuel, till 1 Samuel. So,
yeah. Right. Well, and just the fact that the tent of meeting is set up in the midst of the land allotment, even beyond that, yes, it's going to be in Shiloh for a time. That is significant. The narrative is looking forward in that way. But even more than that, it means that the promised land and the conquest of it was more than like a land grab on the part of the Lord or his people. Mm-hmm. But this is actually the Lord, giving his people a place where they can dwell with him. Right. And that, almost thinking like the Garden of Eden, and then looking forward into the book of Revelation, that the place where we go, the new heavens and the new earth, what makes it that's where we dwell with the Lord. So that, the tent of the meeting being in the land is no small thing, mm-hmm. but this is part of the point mm-hmm. of it all, is that God can dwell with his people there.
Right, exactly. This is what separates Israel from all the other nations, because there's nations battling for lands. There always has been. And we could lump Israel, the people of Israel, in that and give them purely like these human motivations for taking the land. But when we see it starting with Christ giving, or God, the Lord giving this land, and promising to be with his people in this land, then it takes on a whole different, greater significance.
Now, one more thing about the name Shiloh showing up. There's some messianic connections that we can make, but it requires a little bit of explanation, and going back to Genesis 49 and the blessing given to Judah.
Yeah, so Genesis 49:10. So this is the blessing given to Judah, as you mentioned. Now, this depends on what translation you look at in the English, because if you're looking at Genesis 49:10 in the English Standard Version, it reads, "The scepter shall not depart from Judah, nor the ruler's staff from between his feet, until tribute comes to him, and to him shall be the obedience of the peoples." But if you go back to the King James Version of this, you have the scepter shall not depart from Judah, nor a lawgiver from between his feet, until Shiloh come, and unto him shall be the gathering of the people be. I'm not a translation expert, and I unfortunately am not as strong in Hebrew as I ought to be. So I don't know exactly why that's changed in the English Standard Version. But it's commonly understood that this word translated as Shiloh is actually given as a messianic prophecy of the Lord, the Christ, the Messiah who would come. Harstad talks about it this way, that Jacob had blessed each of his sons, but this blessing here in Genesis 49:10, he gave to Judah, who was his fourth son by Leah, the longest blessing. Joshua gives Judah's offspring the first and largest territory west of the Jordan, which was covered in 15. Now Joshua gives Judah's offspring the first and largest territory west of the Jordan. The census of Numbers 26 shows that Judah is the most populous tribe, needs this vast area. But Jacob's blessing that's in Genesis 49, he called Judah a lion, a symbol of strength and leadership, and this tribe will give Israel its greatest kings and the world its king of kings. That is, that Shiloh would come in this way. So there's significance to the Shiloh popping up in the Old Testament, and then also this city of Shiloh popping up in the Pentateuch, and then the city of Shiloh popping up in Joshua.
Right, yeah, and the mention of Shiloh in Genesis 49, verse 10 in the Hebrew is, I believe, one of the more contested spots.
Yeah.
There's quite a bit of scholarly opinion on exactly how to understand that, and that's beyond our conversation today. But the mention of it and the way that it was understood by many of our church fathers, that there's a messianic reference, and now here it is in Shiloh, the same name where the tabernacle rests for a while. There's a reminder of the whole point of the Lord bringing his people into the land. This is where he will finally bring his Messiah to accomplish the salvation of the world.
Well, I mean, that's the real big point behind all of it, is that what is the whole point of the settling of the land and God giving the promise to Abraham at the beginning of establishing this great nation, and then giving them the promised land to dwell in. It's always for the purpose of the one by whom all nations of the earth will be blessed, that the one who comes not simply to give people land, but to give an eternal inheritance in the redemption we have from sin.
Now, the last part of verse 1 says, the land lay subdued before them. Talk about that phrase of verse 1.
Yeah, that's really interesting. And again, I'm just kind of quoting from Harstad here. I think this is kind of significant. Israel had accomplished by God's power and according to his promise to free the land from corruption caused by sin and idolatry of its former pagan. That's during the phase, of conquest. And to begin now that the land is subdued, to restore part of it to its original pristine condition. That is, now God will dwell with his people. It will no longer be pagan worship, but the worship of the true God. So this idea of this being subdued for the purpose of the restoration, which again we only see in part, that we'll see in full with the establishment of the new heavens and the new earth, which Christ will bring. Both the assembling of the congregation of Israel and the semi-permanent establishment of the tabernacle are possible at Shiloh in the heart of the land of Canaan because of that conquest, because they're at kind of a time where they're not fighting these enemies and have this, for them, this temporary time of peace.
Yeah, that's right. And we see this throughout the book of Joshua, that there, especially this second half, that there is this peace, this rest that comes upon the land. And of course, the land lay subdued before them. We want to understand that as the Lord's doing. This is another point in the book of Joshua that is made over and over again, that the Lord is the one who has fought for his people. He's given them the victory. And so the fact that the land lays subdued before them is the Lord's doing. And again, I think this is another way that we as Christians can appreciate this section of Joshua, is to see how the Lord fulfilled his promises for the sake of dwelling there with his people and giving his people rest. And as you said, it happens only in part in Joshua. I mean, we know how the narrative of the Old Testament is going to continue, that the rest they enjoy from physical warfare only lasts for a time, and the rest that they enjoy from idolatry only lasts for an even shorter time, that the people fall back into idolatry. But seeing the fulfillment of God's promises here in Joshua is pushing us forward to see how God has fulfilled those for us already in Christ. And then, as you pointed out, to look forward to that day when rest is given in all of its completeness in the new heavens and new earth.
Right, exactly.
Yeah, and all of that so that God can dwell with us, we as his people, he is our God. That's the goal. Yeah. That's always the goal.
And it's always given as a gift too. This idea of subduing the land as well kind of goes back to creation as well in Genesis 1:28. So God created as a gift and gave creation as a gift. And now through this, in a sense, what we have in Joshua is an idea of redemption of this land that he had given. It all comes as a gift.
Well, and there you in verse 2 you have the word inheritance used yet again, and that language also points us to the fact that this is gift. This isn't the people of Israel taking something for themselves, but this is actually their inheritance. The Lord has given and is giving it to them.
Yeah, and that'll come up again too when we get to after the long description that maps out the territory for Benjamin. It ends with this understanding of this is the inheritance of the people of Benjamin. What has just been detailed and described, the borders, north, south, east, west, is now an inheritance of the people, which yet brings about kind of a legal terminology, but also that the land belongs actually to the Lord, and he's the one who's bequeathing it to this specific people in this specific place.
That's right. So it's all gift from the Lord. He has subdued the land before them. He is now giving it to his people as an inheritance. There's 7 tribes that yet need to receive their inheritance, and Joshua has words for them here in Joshua chapter 18. And we're going to pick that up on the other side of the break. You're listening to Sharper Iron on KFUO. We're talking about Joshua 18 with Pastor Sam Wirgau this morning. We will be right back. Please stick around.
Did you know that Lutherans are helping new American immigrants get settled? How about struggling church workers in need of support and refreshment? And we assist at-risk children and provide disaster response to hurricane victims. Through LCMS recognized service organizations, we are doing all this and more. I'm Rahema Kavuga of Lutheran Church Extension Fund, and I don't want you to miss out on hearing what your brothers and sisters in Christ are up to. Visit interesttime.org to see how your support gives life to these works of mercy and love.
What do you think of when you hear the word college? Expensive? Liberal? Woke? Imagine a college that is affordable, a college that is unapologetically conservative and Lutheran, a college that won't take a dime of federal funding, a college that teaches the best of our Western heritage, a college where students grow in the Christian faith instead of leaving it behind. This is Luther Classical College, a college by Lutherans and for Lutherans. Visit our website, lutherclassical.org, subscribe, become a patron, and join the thousands who are making Luther Classical College a reality.
Welcome back to Sharper Iron. It is Wednesday, November 2nd. We are studying Joshua chapter 18, verses 1 to 28 with Pastor Sam Wirgau. He serves at Bethlehem Lutheran Church in Ossian, Indiana. Pastor Wirgau, prior to the break, we made it up to verse 3. There are 7 tribes whose inheritance has not yet been apportioned, and Joshua is going to speak to them in verse 3. What does he have to say?
Yeah, it's he's kind of calling them to task. It's not actually, it's kind of a rebuke. It's kind of a push. Because obviously there seems to have been kind of a slackness, laxadays, they're being lax with this conquest or with this occupation of the land. Actually, like how in the Harstad commentary, he translates this as Joshua said to the sons of Israel, "How long will you be slackers about going for possession of the land that the Lord, the God of your fathers, has given you?" And there's some sense of that Hebrew word to have this idea of being slackers or just not. We kind of draw out kind of an important point to this is that the idea, what we were talking about before the break, this land comes as gift given by God, the God of your fathers. And Harstad notes, the Lord's gift of the land is now a past completed act that has fulfilled God's promises to the patriarchs and Moses. Now Israel needs to take possession of it. It's been given, but they need to receive it. In other words, they need to go out and to take possession of the land. Perhaps there's some debate on whether there was still occupation in that land that it would require work for them to go in there and seize it, or perhaps they were just satisfied with where the situation they were in even before they received this inheritance. We're not really told, but the idea here is that Joshua calls them to task on this to say, here's the gift, now go take possession of it. And that's something they do. The key to their ability to take possession of God's gift is this courageous faith in his promise that he has given this, now go take it. And such God-given faith enables his people to act. And Harstad says the lack of action displays a weakness of their faith, perhaps, in all of this.
What you're talking about here with the Joshua calling them to task, I like that, calling them slackers, perhaps. That it reminds me of the way chapter 17 ended with the two tribes of Joseph.
Oh, yeah.
How they were talking to Joshua and saying, "Look, we don't really have enough land here. We're very numerous. What do we need to do?" And Joshua basically does something very similar, though with more words.
Mm-hmm.
And he tells them, "Look, here's the land the Lord has given. It's yours. Go ahead and take it. This is yours. He's made the promise, and there's difficulties, but the Lord promised. So
Right.
Have at it." And it's I don't know if we're to understand this as directly chronologically right after that, but it follows then that he would kind of look at these other 7 tribes and say, "Hey, what I just got done telling to these tribes of Joseph about taking more land that the Lord has given you, now you go for it too."
Right.
And it's not a but it all comes back to the promise of God.
Right.
That's where this is. That's where we have to understand this. It's not Joshua just telling them sort of like man up and do something,
Right.
But it's rather God's promised it. So what are you waiting for?
Right. I mean, this is kind of harkens back to when the spies spied out the land in the Pentateuch, right? And God had given this land to them, and they go in there and they see it, and they're scared because of this. And so you see, it doesn't. Even after the conquest, that idea of this kind of lack of faith or weakness of faith doesn't go away. What's kind of important to see here, though, too, is this land's a gift. God promises it. And even though that promise kind of fades, perhaps in Israel's thinking, not only here, but elsewhere, the promise of the Lord still stands. It doesn't fail. He doesn't take it away from the people. Even if Joshua has to remind them of God's promises, the faithfulness of God still stands, so that they can go and take hold of that gift. There's a bit of mercy in here, I think, if we really read that they were slacking and going to take the land, or calling into question God's promise that this land would be their inheritance.
You brought up the spies, and it sounds like Joshua does something similar, or maybe has something like that in mind. Not a spy per se, but scouts of sorts. What's going on with the 3 men from each tribe in verse 4?
Yeah, so basically Joshua gives this command on how the rest of the 7 tribes, so this is Benjamin, Simeon, Zebulun, Issachar, Asher, Naphtali, and Dan, how this land's going to be allotted to them. But we have this episode where they're going to 3 men per tribe are going to go survey the land, and then they'll apportion the land into the 7 portions and cast lots. They do that after they survey the land. They return back to the presence of the Lord there at Shiloh, and to Joshua, which I think is really significant, that the actual lot and allotment takes place in the presence of the Lord. But before that, they're going out in there. They're taking the survey of what's going on. So yeah, I said this kind of like the Numbers 13 with Moses sending out the 12 spies, or even Joshua when he sends the spies out to spy in Jericho, and Joshua 2. Similar. I think Numbers 13 is actually very, very significant, because I think what they're looking for is going to be kind of the same thing that is described in detail in Numbers 13, 17 through 20. So what are they actually looking for? Because we're told that they write down a description here, but we're not actually told what is it that they're kind of looking for. Well, in Numbers 13, Moses sent those spies to the land of Canaan very specifically. He says, go up into the Negev and up into the hill country and see what the land is, whether the people who dwell in it are strong or weak, whether there are few or many, whether the land that they dwell in is good or bad, whether the cities that they dwell in are camps or strongholds, and whether the land is rich or poor, whether there are trees in it or not. Be of good courage and bring some of the fruit of the land, that kind of thing. So this idea is to give a very accurate description of what's going on and what this place looks like, so then that they can bring that back to Joshua in their survey.
So the survey is perhaps not only like what we read, for example, later in Joshua 18 and then into the following chapters, where we're drawing boundary lines and noting where cities are, but also just other general characteristics of the land, including who's living there, and maybe even thinking about what it's going to take to defeat them, but all in knowledge of the fact that God has promised that that's going to happen. So it's not a survey to find out, can we do this, but more a survey of, how will we do this according to the Lord's word?
Right.
Something like
yeah,
that.
exactly. And then again, the fact that they return back with the reports and that these things take place again in the presence of the Lord, that he is the one who's giving these gifts, and as the land is given as a gift, it's allotted in the presence of God there at the tabernacle.
Well, yeah, talk more about that then. The fact that they don't just go out and divide it up and then set their stakes down and say, here's where I'm camping, but they go back to the Lord's tabernacle to divide it up or to receive the land by lot. Right. What's the significance?
Well, I mean, Joshua's there, and Joshua's kind of throughout Joshua's served as kind of the spokesperson, but really because God's presence is there. This is the place where they will gather together, so that you can see that this is. You kind of think. Maybe this is a bad analogy, but when you have in movies and stuff, you have somebody has a video will, and the whole family gathers around the reading of the will, but it's from that will that they hear and know what they will be receiving. So again, there's no question that this comes from the Lord, that they're not just going to go out and stake their claims, but that they're going to have these things as God has given them to them.
So it's not going to be 7 tribes. Hey, the rest of the land is up for grabs. Go get the best part for yourself, right. or something like that. But this is even as the Lord sends the Lord through Joshua sends these scouts, these surveyors out. He's still going to be the one who owns the land and who gives the land as an inheritance. It's not just not thinking internally within Israel. It's not a land grab for these 7 tribes, but this is still the Lord doing the giving.
Right. Exactly. God's doing the giving. Now he's doing it through Joshua. And I think that's significant to see. Joshua's giving these instructions, and saying, go out to this land and see what it's like, and then return back to Joshua. But Joshua's only the spokesperson for the Lord in this sense. It is really God who's giving this inheritance to his people.
So, I mean, what then is the significance of using Joshua as the spokesperson? I mean, this is true all along, but particularly here in Joshua 18.
Well, I mean, it's God appointed him for this particular work to be done in this way. And I think there is some significance to see that God frequently through the Old Testament and in the New Testament is using people, using specific offices to do his work. And the office never supersedes or goes above and beyond what God gives it to do. But I think, we can definitely, and Harstad does this. He makes a connection here with even Joshua and the office of the holy ministry. He says, this may be compared to the way a Christian pastor ministers sacramentally in the church sanctuary before and on behalf of Christ himself, and distributes God's gifts of grace through the word and sacrament for the benefit of God's people. He ministers here before the Lord in the chancel. He leads and joins the congregation in calling upon God as our God and our Father. So again, Joshua's not God. He has no authority in this other than what God has appointed him to do it. But God works through people throughout the scriptures, and through prophets and apostles and evangelists, even as he continues to work it in his church today. It's God's presence, God's gifts that he's given, but he uses, again, it's a real concrete thing on how God works, and he uses a real concrete men as pastors to be giving out these gifts.
I think that's a helpful connection to make between Joshua and his role for the people and the way the Lord makes use of Joshua as his spokesperson. I wonder if we might also think about the way that the Lord makes use of all Christians through their various vocations, simply in the fact that he does send out these 21 surveyors, 7 times 3. He doesn't have to do it that way. Right. He doesn't have to use like spies in the book of Numbers or surveyors here. And although they're not described, that we've got allotments already without hearing about the role of surveyors. So I wonder if just thinking about the surveyors themselves is a reminder of just the way God uses all of his Christians in their various callings, their vocations, to be, to serve the neighbor. That's God serving through them. Yeah,
exactly. Luther calls these the masks of God, right? That, as Jean Edward Veith put it, the God at work vocation. How does God work? Well, he does work immediately in many ways in providing for his people, but so often he works immediately or through means and through people to serve serve his purposes. And in Joshua in particular, he uses these specific people that are called to these positions to survey the land, to lay out the land. And even nowadays, God continues to use all Christians in various ways to serve their neighbor, be it a father, mother, son, daughter, husband, wife, or worker.
Yeah. I mean, and I think in the whole text, the combination between the surveyors going out and describing the land, and even, it sounds like they're even dividing it up such that they know what the various chunks of land are going to look like. They just don't know which name to write into which section.
Yeah. I think because they're waiting for the lot. Yeah. The lots to be drawn. Yep.
Right. So you see both the divine and the human element there very clearly, such that you do see how the Lord works through vocation there, which comforts us in our vocations today, when sometimes maybe it doesn't seem in the thick of the moment, when the mother is changing the dirty diaper, or the father is laboring during the day to provide for his family. It may not be easy to see that, yes, this is God at work. Yeah. And so when you see it maybe more a little clearly here in Joshua 18, that provides the comfort for us today. When we don't see it, we have the assurance, yes, this is still God at work.
Yep, exactly. Amen.
Very good. So it happens. Take us into the last part of this transitional section, verses 8 to 10.
Yeah, 8 through 10, basically everything that was laid out at the beginning comes to pass. It really demonstrates that all this is done during Joshua's command. And this is something you find often in the Old Testament, where a command is given and then we see it described in detail, very much paralleled on how it comes to pass. But again, note that in verse 10, the emphasis again that this takes place before the Lord. Joshua cast for them lots at Shiloh before the Lord, and Joshua portioned there the land, sons of Israel, according to their portions. So before we get to the specifics of Benjamin, again, to notice that that all these things are coming to pass before the Lord and according to his promises.
So the rest of chapter 18 then deals with the people of Benjamin. Before we talk about the land that's given, just remind us concerning the tribe of Benjamin and the backstory of the sons of Jacob. Who are we talking about with Benjamin?
Right. So Benjamin was born of Rachel. He's the youngest of Jacob's 12 sons. And he was the only one that was born in the promised land of Canaan in Genesis. And so he's one of the 12, and he is his tribe then is allotted this land according to the promise that God had given in the Pentateuch.
Well, what strikes me is with Benjamin being the first now of these 7, Benjamin's the youngest. He's maybe not the one that I would have expected to come forward first, and yet the lot does fall on him. I wonder, I don't know, I'm not sure if there's anything to that. The order earlier, we talked about how Judah being the first to receive the allotment on the west side of the Jordan is, points to the significance of Judah being the one to whom the scepter is given. Right. The ruler comes from him. The promise goes through him. Next in line comes Ephraim and Manasseh, the 2 sons of Joseph, the favorite of Jacob, receiving the double portion, and Ephraim in particular, being kind of the chief of the tribes among the northern kingdom later. And then after this brief interlude, then comes Benjamin. I don't know if there's anything to the order at this point, or if this is simply, we just should recognize, hey, God's the one who's choosing it, and Benjamin came up first. I don't know. Any thoughts?
Right. We do have Benjamin kind of being held in pretty high regard by his father in Genesis. I don't know if these are allotted in order of importance or anything like that. Again, I guess it might be just the fact that this is how God would see it. As being in good order. I didn't really come across anything that would say anything particular about the order of the rest of the tribes being allotted, though.
Sure, and just looking at their names right now, I'm not sure that there is. Benjamin being the youngest, it just strikes me, and maybe it is simply the fact that this is the way God arranged it. Benjamin came up first; that was his choice, and that is certainly God's prerogative.
It is significant, though, to see the connection between Judah and Benjamin as far as their land coming close together, as well as to Joseph's sons to the north. And that's going to really kind of come up, I think. I found that comes up pretty well when we talk about Jerusalem in relationship to Judah and Benjamin, because it's right there connecting the two, if you will.
Sure. So let's talk a little geography, at least as best as you can talk about geography on the radio.
Right.
Again, if you've got a map, this is a good time to pull it out. If you're following along in the Lutheran Study Bible, there's a great one on page 365 right here in the book of Joshua. So let's do a little bit of geography. There are actually some place names that are familiar here. And as you pointed out, a lot of shared place names from some of the other tribes that we've already heard.
Right.
So give us some geography. For
Right. So what we do in 11 through 28 is you kind of have the allotment of setting the borders, and then the second part of it is actually naming cities. So when we're setting kind of the border here, it's this corridor between Judah in the south and the two tribes descended from Joseph, Ephraim and Manasseh on the north. What you kind of see here when you look at the map is Benjamin's allotment is quite small, especially compared to Judah. but it being mentioned here now, I'm one of the first ones that it's such a small piece of land. However, it's not necessarily about the size, but it's much more about its location that is really of significance. Its positions really was seen as very strategic militarily and commercially. And Josephus actually writes about this. I quoted this from Harstad, that wrote that this lot was the narrowest of all. This is from Josephus' Antiquities. The narrowest of all by reason of the goodness of the land, for it included Jericho and the city of Jerusalem. So though it's narrow, it's got significant location and significant cities in it.
Yeah, I mean, you mentioned Jericho and Jerusalem. Those are two of the biggest ones in the entire Old Testament that we're talking about, and we've seen them already. Now, what about Jerusalem? Because we've heard about Jerusalem briefly in the allotment of Judah.
Right.
At the very end of Joshua 15, it said the Jebusites, the inhabitants of Jerusalem, the people of Judah could not drive out. So the Jebusites dwell with the people of Judah at Jerusalem to this day. And here we hear again about Jerusalem in the allotment of Benjamin. So what's going on with Jerusalem?
So we kind of have this, it's mentioned, of course, like we said in 15, would be the allotment. However, we get it specifically given as a city to Benjamin, although the fields south of Jerusalem were assigned to Judah. And the reasoning for this, well, I'm not sure exactly the reasoning for this, but reason is probably mentioned in Jerusalem is mentioned in the allotment of the land to Judah, is kind of its connection. The sons of Judah may have attempted to unsuccessfully drive out the Jebusites from the field south of Jerusalem, who had signed to Judah. Jerusalem maybe is named kind of in a broader sense there. It could be also that the sons of Judah may have helped the tribe of Benjamin to drive out the Jebusites from the city itself. There's lots of possibilities, but ultimately what it comes down to is that you have this close connection between Judah and Benjamin with this city of Jerusalem, though the city of Jerusalem itself is given to Benjamin, to the tribe of Benjamin. And that city of Jerusalem, we obviously know, takes on great significance for the rest of the Old Testament, as well as into the New Testament as kind of the city.
That's right. That's right. Yeah. I mean, anytime we see Jerusalem, we need to be paying attention. and so this, shared role between Benjamin and Judah, and I, maybe just thinking forward into the Old Testament, when you have the divided kingdom, it is Judah and Benjamin, and I think along with Simeon, which is there in the middle of Judah, they are the southern kingdom, exactly. And so we already start to see their close connections here. Right. It's just striking how the Old Testament, it's like the Lord knows where things are going as He's writing the story. Right,
exactly. So He puts things just right where they can see it, and we don't really see the big picture until we get to the end of the book.
That's right. So as we've seen throughout the book of Joshua, we will continue to see, we need to keep reading in order to get the fullness of where this is going, which is, of course, pointing us toward Christ. So, Pastor Wirgau, we've got just under 5 minutes here on the morning to reflect on everything that we've read here in Joshua 18 and where this account of Joshua is going. You've already helped us significantly in the way that you've reminded us this is real history. These are real places. The Lord really keeps his promises. Thinking about Joshua 18, how would you sum it up? How does this text help us to see Christ?
Well, I think one of the biggest things we can kind of see is in terms of this covenant promise, this inheritance that's being given, which is mentioned even here towards the end of 18, just as it was mentioned at the beginning, that these things are given as an inheritance. It's got this legal terminology to it, of course, but that the land itself, again, belongs to the Lord, and he is the one who gives it to his people. This is the covenant, the testament, the giving of the gifts away to his people. What we don't want to do, or we want to be careful about when we talk about the land in the Old Testament, is to say that it finds its end in the land, as if the land is the thing that is of most importance, as opposed to God's promise in providing for his people this land for the sake of the coming Messiah. So the land is significant in the Old Testament and to the New Testament. But it's going to take its significance only from the fact that through that this land is given to the tribes of Israel for the very purpose that one of the descendants of Israel will be the promised Messiah by whom all nations will be blessed. And so I think there's a sense where the land is still even significant today, but not in the sense that it is somehow greater than the gift that comes from the land, the inheritance that we have in Christ Jesus. Again, the land's significant because this is the place where the Messiah would come, where he would walk, where he would talk, where he would bleed, where he would die, and where he would rise again from the dead. And through his ascension into heaven and his session at the right hand of the Father, though, now that gospel message goes out beyond these lands. That's kind of the theme of Acts, where it spreads out from Jerusalem to Judea to all the ends of the earth. So it spreads out from there, but it's still the same promises of God. Same God of the Old Testament is the one who continues to give his inheritance, his gifts to his people here and now. The forgiveness of sins, life, and salvation. And our faith, just as the people of Israel and the tribes of Israel received this land by faith in God's promises, we receive the gifts of God by faith in his promises. And perhaps we can be like those tribes and need to be told by a Joshua to stop being slackers and to receive the gifts and take possession of what God has promised. God continues to be faithful to his promises in giving these things.
That's right. Fantastic, Pastor Wirgau. Pastor Sam Wirgau is pastor at Bethlehem Lutheran Church in Ossian, Indiana, helping us today with Joshua chapter 18, verses 1 to 28. Pastor Wirgau, thanks for being our guest today.
It's always a pleasure.
God keeps his promises to real people in real places, just as he kept his promises to Israel in the land of Canaan under the leadership of Joshua, particularly Benjamin in Joshua chapter 18. So he keeps his promises to you and to me still today, where we are. He meets us in word and in sacrament to give us the gifts of Christ, life, forgiveness, and salvation now and for all eternity. I am your host here on Sharper Iron, Pastor Timothy Appel. If you have any questions about the book of Joshua or comments on the series, or if you'd just like to let us know where you're listening, we would love to hear from you. Please send an email to kfuo@kfuo.org. It is always a pleasure to get correspondence. Thanks for spending the morning with us. Talk to you again tomorrow.